As they moved, he swore in the mystery of the individual's location, while a man on the cell tower exclaimed at the amusing pack of men before him, while the man relayed how he had normally retired 3 years ago from the front lines and now used the loopholes of the system. Dre reasoned his bloodthirst to be anything but normal. Regardless of the scavenger's moral deeds to him, it was all a business. The man slowly brings out a dark red ball, while Dark watched in absolute terror and commanded his men to shoot. He jumped through the pelting bullets and landed right before them, but as Van noticed his appearance drastically changed, Johnson cursed at the monster, but it soon appeared right before him and quickly jabbed at him while the men screamed his name. The man asks if they wondered why he had spared the men. The reason was his current power, since he needed a living fuel. It was black magic in its darkest form. Van had previously seen such wizard classes, but watching him consume flesh proved he was either a vampire or bloodia. Although there would be severe side effects, he was probably trying to end it all. Twirling his dagger, he charged towards a frightened Dellen, but although a man jumped in front with a shield, the beast cut through and immediately zapped behind Dellen. As the troopers watched in horror, he tore off the head with his bare teeth as Dre asks his men to charge, and they follow. He wondered how they would taste. Pivoting his foot, he raced through the men and struck Dre, throwing him back. A shot ran through his head as the girl ordered her unit to shoot. He charged at them with a beastly gleam, but as they watched in horror, a bolt of thunder rang as Van called it to precisely strike the target and avoid the mercenaries. He was aware that if he had avoided the strike, his next target would be himself. He had predicted and prepared a barrier, but as the others fired, the beast was to kill the mage, since despite the bullets, the lightning calls were devastating. He activates his myriad spells of aim, recoil, and rapid outburst and shot, which further disbanded into myriad other bullets and drilled through the shocked beast. He had been preparing it since before the thunder calling, but the target wasn't dead yet. His fragile body would break in a single mistake, but he had learned to not avoid close combats. He grabbed the monster by his throat and called forth for lightning yet again, electrocuting the savage beast, but he soon grabbed his hand and gleamed at the weak power while Lennox smiled, asking if such was the case. Before we continue, take a moment to answer the question of the day. What is the best magic skill? Comment down below for a chance to be shouted out. Now, back to the recap. The beast was still struggling, while a normal human would have already been turned to ashes. But since Lennox had witnessed monsters capable of catching bullets with their eyelids, he decided another would not be too unreasonable. He activated another spell, loading acceleration, and fired double loads through the target's right eye and head. It flinched at the surging pain and swore to kill the magical attacker. Not 2, but 4 different pairs rushed then after, and the Krimgar group of mercenaries rushed in to pin their immediate foe to the ground. Dre exclaimed at its persistent nature. Mike was curious about what their captain intended to do with their captive. Dre was clueless about the monster's condition, and then turned towards the mage Van for help, who then revealed that it was black magic. The fundamental principle behind it was simple. One was required to sacrifice plenty for a massive amplification of their stamina and recovery rate, and most hence resorted to human flesh or blood for the source. But when that energy grew scarce in supply, they lost their rationality. The man he had fought had already lost his coherence within moments, since he had failed to consume flesh continuously, which explained that he had left the humans alive to supply himself steadily. Rarely did mages specialize in black magic, and hence very few were aware of this type of magic, and that was the same scenario that had left the Krimgar men clueless. Although there had not been any weaknesses after he had taken the pill, there were ample now. He requested the others to move aside and placed his hand on the Baron's shoulder with motives of sapping out all of its black magic by using his own mana to scratch it all out. He extracted the pitch-black substance out of the struggling monster whose monstrous pallor was now starting to fade. It let out a terrified screech as an orb of the black mana formulated on the mage's hands, and it fell down limp and drained. Van then ordered the men to kill it, affirming that he would now be all right. He later debated what he was to do with the dark energy, since to hold mana there were specialized containers, but neither did he have one nor obtain at that immediate moment. He could learn plenty about black magic if he could keep it with himself, but as unfortunate as it was, he released the constrained orb of energy since he was constantly losing his own mana to hold on to something that futile. Someone exclaimed that his exceptional prowess as he turned to find a red-haired man, inquisitive if he was a genius. He could see the mana he had been controlling all along and felt pathetic at his own capabilities at that, but his potential to see mana from such a distance appalled Lennox. It then meant that Red Hair was born with an exceptional sensitivity to mana, relaying that instead of combat, he was talented in mana control. After having witnessed multiple mages throughout his career, Red Hair then inquired if imitating him could make him stronger. He wasn't certain if he wanted to become a mage, since he previously thought that being a mercenary would suffice. Lennox, aware of what he intended to convey, since he was adjusting to the same as well as he could as an outsider, did not intend to offer him any false hopes. He relayed that Dre, their leader, was a good leader, and as such, he requested him to seek advice on such matters from him, if, in case, he could formulate his decisions sometime soon. He was to then visit Jenny for further help. The evening had grown silent before the relieved Dre. The Krimgar group heard a pair of approaching footsteps and bowed to greet their benefactor, the lightning mage, Van. He thanked Van for his efforts throughout the skirmish, and the two discussed the unavoidable and unforeseen deaths throughout the clash. The job had been completed with the server backup and the stabilization of the situation. Moving on, Van requested of Dre to send a portion of the monster's blood to Jenny. Dre also relayed that he had sent the entire fee of 20 million cell to Jenny. But finally, he presented him a card, moved by his performance. He hoped for a next time in the near future by some sleek chance. Van bid them farewell, positive that he should remain in touch with Dre of the Krimgar, because of his capabilities as a mercenary and a businessman. When Kithel queried if they should have at least suggested the offer of working for them, her leader gave out a hearty laugh, since the prowess that the mage had displayed was good enough for the Lightning Tower to take him in. As such, although uncertain, anyone who would hire him would monopolize his talent to the best. It indeed was a shame, since they would never chance upon such a mage ever, and there was an uncertainty that, as mercenaries, they might even meet as enemies the next time. Dre, the businessman, then implied that it was the very reason for them to depart with a good impression. Although she would have felt satisfied at having at least made her request, that would have left something far from a good impression. Certainly none could ever predict the consequences their actions would entail, but he always did the best he could in any given situation. As such, all they could now do was hope to get lucky. Dylan greeted his long-lost partner, who questioned the unexplained progression. Dylan lived up hoped for a famous friend for himself that made Van curious, but as he proceeded to explain something Jenny and the Krimgar group had done, the menu booklet was slapped right on his unsuspecting head. The victim silently shivered on the floor, while the attacker inquired about Van's experience with the mercenaries. He then stated that fighting the higher-ups of the scavengers was comparatively easier than Kroken. Even Jenny remarked that a retired soldier of District 51 was usually predictable, but Dylan returned to his joyous seat while arguing that not all of them were weak. Jenny looked at Van with a hopeful smile. "Van, I have some new opportunities for you," she said, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. She knew that Van's reputation as the Lightning Mage had grown, and more clients were seeking his services. Van nodded, intrigued. He had been considering his next move, and Jenny always seemed to have interesting offers. "Tell me more," he replied. She handed him a folder containing a list of requests. "These are from various clients, but I think you'll find one that suits you," Jenny explained. "I also have something special for you." Van raised an eyebrow, curious about what Jenny had in store. He flipped through the folder, noticing requests for bodyguard services, mercenary work, and lab testing. But one request caught his eye from the Scavenger Guild itself. "Scavenger Guild?" Van mused aloud. "I've had my differences with them recently." Jenny chuckled. "That's precisely why I thought you'd be interested," she admitted. "I have a feeling they left that request there on purpose." After careful consideration, Van excluded requests from individuals and mercenary offices, as well as those with nearby deadlines. What remained was a request from a pharmaceutical company named Amnak. It piqued his interest, and he knew it might hold the key to his health problems. Van had been searching for a cure, or at least a glimmer of hope for his ailment, and the Amnak commission seemed like a step in the right direction. As he lay in bed that night, he couldn't help but think about the upcoming tasks. He had to act quickly, as some deadlines were overlapping. His body was frail, and the side effects of the Viper were taking a toll. Despite his exhaustion, he had to sort out his next steps. Over the next few weeks, Van found himself hunting wanted criminals on behalf of Amnak, testing his sniping skills. He fired precise shots with his handgun, relying on his natural abilities rather than magic. He knew he could improve further with support magic, but that would have to wait. When he returned to Jenny's establishment, she greeted him warmly, sensing that his vacation had been productive. She inquired about his experience, and then handed him the Amnak offer he had accepted. Van was surprised at how Jenny had guessed correctly, but he appreciated her intuition. "You're right," he admitted, "and I'm interested in this Amnak offer." As they discussed the details, Jenny mentioned that someone from Amnak would soon pay them a visit. Just then, a voice exclaimed from the entrance, and a well-dressed man entered, recognizing Van as Jenny's latest customer. The man was aware of his identity as the Lightning Mage, who was reportedly obsessed with money. That was also sensible on Lennox's end, but the man did not imply it in a bad way. He further stated that people like him did not usually care about a bounty on their heads, until either they were simple nobodies or people strong enough to not care about such bounties. Regardless of the dual spectrums of his keen observations, Lennox queried about his identity, aware of it himself. The man rummaged through his vest before flinging something across the table. Although Lennox flinched and rushed his hand to catch it, a card levitated right before him. The event was an extreme surprise for him, since the man before him was someone with supernatural powers. He caught hold of the card himself, and the man presented himself as Sebastian, who dealt in the same work as Jenny. The card in Lennox's hand had no emanating mana, conveying the probability that the man dealt with psychological skills. He then inquired if he was a telekinesis user, and the man gleamed at the obvious reaction before relaying that Van must have gone somewhere foreign to train, since his presence and prowess had been unknown lately. The bottle he was reaching out for was snatched away as an angry Jenny appeared, inquisitive about why he was approaching her clients. Sebastian immediately surrendered any intentions of such, since he was there to give her something. She grew curious about the something, and it was a conscription. She was baffled since the delegation's visit was to happen 2 months later, reasonably early and angering for the two since someone from the city's council was pushing the matter. Lennox was aware of the news from the day before, since the city's government had called up all the independent businesses, and he could gauge from their facial expressions that it was a considerably big deal. Sebastian decided to take his due leave and offered Van to call him in case he felt like taking on variable jobs, while promising to reward him with plenty of other things besides what Jenny offered. He left while Jenny exclaimed at his evil nature. Jenny herself offered Lennox to approach Sebastian for better requests and exposure, since she was aware that no customer heeded the pleas of a business. As for the request of his, the Amnak member was due to arrive soon, and a door creaked open as a pair of feet appeared. The two waiters watched as a man with a file walked in, excusing himself. Jenny asked him to follow them to a room. Inside, Lennox paced the room while the two sat face to face. He requested to learn why she did not reveal such a rune before, but she then argued that he used to always leave quickly. She then introduced them to the man of concern, who then presented himself as Luan Sage, the sale manager of Amnak. He offered to address his subject directly without any delays, and queried if Van was aware of the context of their request. Amnak was creating a tranquilizer with a small-scale crowdfunding, Sage explained. As a side note, he mentioned that members of the crowd could also fund using the thanks option. The plan of Amnak was to reap profits once the development bore enough sales. However, that was hindered since a district representative from the headquarters decided to use their connections with the gang and steal Amnak's patent rights. When Vaughn was curious about what he was supposed to do, Luan further elaborated that the public wasn't aware that the development of the tranquilizer was ready yet. Just when they were about to send in a sample to the patent office, the culprit district representative grew aware of this, and the piece of information was leaked, proving that there was also a spy inside their Senate. Luan also passed him a picture showcasing where, in the District 54, they had moved the samples. The job for Mage Van was to retrieve those samples and turn them into the patent office. Van called out to Sage and demanded him to act honestly if they wanted to propose such business deals. Luan trembled at the statement, as Van noted his intents of playing dumb, and then relayed that it wasn't as simple as him just turning in the sample. Jenny, who had been observing the conversation, picked up on the message and demanded if there was any guarantee that Van would not run into the gang. Van himself queried if they just hoped for him to hide and turn the sample, if that was all their deal conveyed. But when Luan failed to frame a solid reply, Van deduced that Amnak did not just want the small errand done. They wanted an entire military force to wipe the gang out. Van was still baffled at how they could have even thought he would simply deal with the gang while getting the samples. Jenny then stated their need to renegotiate the terms. She handed Luan a mobile device to call his superior and find out how much they intended to provide as an incentive for Van to deal with the gang. She relayed that they would be awaiting his reply downstairs. Jenny found the little lie cute, as they were probably intent on saving some money. The task itself wasn't quite difficult since gangs under some district manager would barely amount to even 100. They would be about the same level as the previous scavengers, while their mixed blood leader would be an exception. Regardless of the difficulty, they definitely needed an increased reward for the deal now. Jenny volunteered to make a definite increase of 10 million. The door to their room creaked open, and Luan walked in with a nod. Jenny further assured Van herself. The evening was cold and the car pacing through the city's outskirts was fast. One could relate to Van's confusion, wondering if the others would have already reached their destination. He proudly stated that they had hired multiple others to protect the storage, but not as many as the gang. Van, however, was uncertain of how helpful the others would be to him, but considered asking one about the medicine he was seeking. He calmly stated that, in accordance with Jenny, they had tried to rip him off while disregarding his value, and Luan tried to overwrite with a stuttering claim of misunderstanding. He silently stared back at the nervous driver of his and asked if there were any other samples inside the storage. Luan then disclosed that there were samples that their boss personally used, and probably some melatonin that Van was seeking, which was great since he was in need of it. The Amnak storage at the District 54 was bustling as a car pulled up before the awaiting men announced it to Van, who ordered him to avoid exiting the car. A few men came knocking at the Amnak official's door, and as the man stuttered in agreement, the man furiously demanded of him to come outside. Luan was scared at the mysterious threat, since the men demanded to learn how the bare minimum of 10 men were supposed to face the gang numbered in hundreds. Van deduced that he had also skimped them and helped himself to one of his newly acquired substances. He ordered the scared Luan to follow him outside since he was resolute to work for his pay. The men halted at his sudden appearance and then moved on to threatening him to leave at once. They demanded clarifications from Luan since he hadn't mentioned anything about the gangs while hiring them, but the noise annoyed the lightning mage Van. Although he offered them to quieten down voluntarily, they argued how not even he would be spared once the gang arrived. Although he understood their reasons for being scared, when the men focused their frustration and anger onto him, he had no intentions of talking it out. He avoided the incoming blow while furnishing a ball of lightning in his palm. He activated his specialty bolt, and it spiked across the attacker's body. The others flinched at the sight of a mage, and could now understand how Amnak had planned to deal with the difference in numbers. They were hushed at his second demand, a little content that they were aware of the gang. He was curious why they wasted their energy bickering about it, but an enraged one of them demanded him to escape before he decided to beat him up. He watched as the crowd parted, and a red-haired walked through, reasoning that he was nothing better than them. He raised his arm with some offensive motive and produced a massive outburst of flames. With a clap, he then conveyed to the others that not all mages were as great as they considered. The mage before them was probably kicked out of a magic tower for possessing very little mana. The others found the explanation reasonable, and while Van laughed at how he had chanced upon 2 supernaturals in the same day, the hot dog was surprised at his laugh. Pyrokinesis, or the ability to control flames, was a very strong and direct ability, but since the man was of the lowly group, Lennox guessed he wasn't considerable. He then inquired of his intentions if it was to beat him up and burn the car, but the man denied any chances. But since he considered Van a low-class mage, he decided to burn him alongside the car, aware of words being no solution in his field of work. Lennox watched as the flaming fist charged at him. He formulated a shield before himself, which came as a surprise for the attacker. He was frantic and afraid of what he was doing to his flames, but reading the flow of mana, Lennox availed himself of the same fiery ability. He was now overwhelming the fist he had grappled, and the owner of it gave out a terrified scream as his own arm was now burning. The others in the audience were growing shocked at the incident they bore witness to. The Ghost Rider before them was set ablaze, since none but Lennox was aware that not all pyrokinetics were resistant to fire. He desperately begged him to spare his life, and Lennox withdrew his hands soon after, disappointed that his own grip strength had failed him. The onlookers were frantic to put out the fire since it could spread to the storage, and hurried requests for water resounded soon after. One agreed to leave at once and rushed to his car without any intentions of dying. Lennox was required to bring the new sample to the patent office by the morning of the day after, which meant that he was needed to hold on to the storage for a day and a half. After searching for a while, he found the samples of concern. He could run away with it, but that wasn't the request from Anak. He decided that if he was to fight the gang, he had to dispose of them then and there while the other units were busy conversing. Then he approached, inquisitive of their plans. He could guess that they could not piece one themselves, and on his query, they revealed that there were 15 people, including the now conscious redhead. He ordered them to split into 3 groups to guard and patrol, while blocking the entrance and reporting anything strange to him since he had something else to attend to. Lennox was grateful that the gang hadn't discovered their messed up situation. The back wall was pretty high for any intruders to climb over, but it was still considerably battered. He activated a spell named Claymore and placed it right before himself and the wall. The orb he had formulated was a special spell, since it was a trap magic that exploded when a few certain conditions were met. The spell dealt severe damages to those in its range, but its range wasn't wide enough to deal with large groups. But as the exceptional mage he was, Lennox could simply reform such requirements himself. Instead of exploding when people entered its range, he formulated it to occur when the wall behind was pressured by some force. Also, by reducing the damage it dealt, he increased the range it expanded over. The new spell flared before him, and after a vigorous amount of reformation and adjustments, it disappeared from his human sight. He then planned to plant multiple such spells around the perimeter. He planted another at the adjacent wall and another right at the entrance to the facility. As he approached the other men, the redhead bowed before him in reverence. He halted before his new subject, who sincerely apologized for his previous discourtesy and vowed never to repeat himself in such a way. Lennox, however, declined the need for such an apology and instead asked him to subscribe to this YouTube channel. Moving on, he requested the man to spare his life, but Lennox did not intend to reveal that he never intended to kill him. With motives of feigning it, he asked if he had hurried to avoid anyone witnessing him apologize. The man conveyed yet another apology, but Lennox had a chance in store for him to make it up. At his query, Lennox stated that when a few guests would arrive that same night, he was to set their shoulders ablaze, much like he had attempted on him. The man nodded in agreement and was excused soon after. Lennox said amidst his own raging mana and on a makeshift seat inside the facility, he did not have ample of his cachet in case the gang split up into multiple bunches, and decided to utilize his gun in case such difficulties approached. There resounded multiple shots outside, and he noticed the noisy environment out there. He expanded his mana in a radius around him, and blasphemously maximized it to cover the entire area for surveillance. Amongst the presences he felt within a 2-kilometer radius, 2 of them exuded higher readings of heat, disregarding them specific to the count of the other invaders, rounded about to a rough digit of 150. He emerged from his seclusion and relayed to the frantic men that he was aware of the ongoings. Although the approach was considerably fast, he knew that not all of them could be mana users by any bleak chance, and wondered if they were inside cars. Sure enough, multiple cars approached with roaring engines, alarming the defending men. They covered their eyes as the cars blared their huge lights towards them. All of the defensive units were blinded by the piercing flash, and Van noticed that he needed to give some relief to the troubled men who sought help from him. He stated that they were solely required to guard the entrance while he would deal with the rest. The pyrokinetic had been educated well and was now standing at the very start of the queue. However, the apparent invaders were absolutely still and void of any movements. What he feared the most then occurred, and another set of lights flared right through the back wall. The men shrieked at the absolutely unexpected event, but as the vehicles approached the surrounding walls, every single remaining site of the facility received their fair share of impacts. It compelled Lennox to wonder if they planned to break the walls, and if so, it confirmed who would be returning alive from their eventual clash. The traps he had planted flared into action soon after the sound of explosions followed alongside the beautiful sight of automotive fireworks. The audience watched the soothing sight unfurl right above them and shrieked as the residues landed behind them. The Mage van was taken by surprise since the claymores he had planted weren't supposed to be powerful enough to throw vehicles that great a distance. But as he noticed with his keen eyes, the fuel was fortunately not the regular one he knew of, and was hence responsible for enforcing the explosion. The picturesque show of fireworks had but just begun for the responsible magician who watched as his magic was unveiled. He understood that although the attackers were paying a high price for their rashness, they were also figuring out their enemies simultaneously. He spotted 2 men amidst the smoke, most probably the 2 he had detected with high heat. One of the pair exuded considerable mana, proving his standing as the mage. It was the 3rd time Lennox had chanced upon one, after the professor at the library and the detection-type mage of the scavengers. Although disappointing as the man had been, the mage before him was an absolute different specimen since he was leading the gang. Lennox was lost in the realm of curiosity, of the surprises he had in store, and of the inherent magic or attacks the man and other endless possibilities. He soon jolted back to reality and decided to get hold of the situation he was in. Foremost, he activated his mana through his palm and fingers before blasting in every possible angle around himself. He gauged the exploded walls and found 10 destroyed cars. The number of remaining people had been now reduced to about 100. As such, he used his other hand and summoned another orb of mana and amplified his voice to demand of how long the gang intended to stare at them before proceeding. He demanded of them to charge without further ado, and one of them transmitted the order to move. Multiple men hopped out of the vehicles before marching towards them with various ammunitions and weapons, being led by the mage and another individual. Van ordered to inform the other fellows to shut their eyes and shoot once the attackers crossed the entrance. He had no time to explain further. Their curious minds and the excitement in the air made the situation tense yet thrilling. The man rushed to his mates at once, signaling the urgency of the moment. Guns were soon readied as the news spread like wildfire among the men, and they positioned themselves strategically. As the approaching figures drew nearer, the men couldn't contain their excitement. Smiles crept across their faces. The leader of the group, however, came to a sudden stop as Van activated his spell flux light. The beam that followed his invocation was blinding, and it submerged the men in an unexpected radiance. Before we continue, let's take a moment to shout out at Abhilash Meher 7367, who commented, absorption on our omniscient reader video. Thanks for commenting. As Van had previously commanded, his men started shooting blindly into the blinding light. It was too late for the attackers to retreat from the trap they had unknowingly walked into. Men screamed in agony as the searing light not only blinded them, but also caused intense pain. With blazing red hair, Van rushed towards the blinded men, dutifully setting their shoulders ablaze as commanded. The others shrieked at the gruesome sight and turned away, but the incinerator moved with fluid precision. He kindled every shoulder he chanced upon, leaving a trail of fiery chaos. Van watched the scene unfold, trying to refrain from using any more spells to avoid revealing his identity as the mage orchestrating this mayhem. However, he had no intention of simply standing by. He activated his trusty old chain lightning, sending bolts of electricity zapping through the fleeing men. Guns were also blazing simultaneously as the men fired at any movement before them. The scenario became a one-sided mayhem, and Lena couldn't help but wonder if this was the only role he had to play as the mage. Then he turned his magical eyes towards the two apparent leaders who were watching the scene from afar, realizing he was about to face them to conclude the battle. The two leaders stared back at him, puzzled by the mage-like abilities Van displayed. Grime, one of the leaders, questioned Amnak's resources, stating that they couldn't afford good mages. This piqued Van's curiosity even further, and he approached the interesting mage, inquisitive about whether his mind remained sane. Van couldn't help but question them about the fate of their dying subordinates. The man simply laughed it off, referring to them as mere disposables. While they continued their conversation, Van slowly backed towards a storage area. Grime then revealed the other man's name, Guile, who seemed intent on conversing. To Van, he appeared terribly weak, and as Grime encouraged him to reconsider his employment, Van deduced that the two weren't members of the gang, but had been separately employed. The man's carefree attitude about his subordinates' fates led Van to believe that he might be on the mage's side, lured by the promise of wealth and power. Guile, on the other hand, was not pleased by Van's smile. In fact, he was angered by it. Even Grime started exuding his own mysterious mana as tension rose. He activated the wand he carried alongside him, causing small particle-like blocks to formulate and merge into a shield before him. Lennox watched in awe as he saw the texture and flow of mana right around and about the mage. What he was witnessing was barrier magic. He could understand that he was planning to block the escape routes of his, but he too was resolute to avoid it at all costs. He threw his hand inside his vest, and Grime immediately the spell he was chanting and formed another barrier to halt the approaching something. It shattered at the impact as he realized that it was a bullet. Guile chuckled at his carelessness. Despite Van's weak appearance, Grime demanded in anger of how he tried to imitate being a mana user. Van inquired to learn if the term was an insult, but that wasn't a predicament Grime could then answer. He then turned to Guile, demanding if he wasn't aware that he was to defend his partner Mage in a fight, but he laughed at how weak his prowess was. He stated that he could have gauged that his attributes were lightning and light, which were very conspicuous. Lennox could understand why they acted so relaxed before him. Magic that was based on the fundamentals of light were very strong, but it was very distinct whenever one cast any of it. Anyone who could identify it could easily prepare himself. But Van wasn't just a regular mage. When Guile offered to tear Van apart in case the situation grew severe, he noted the canines in his jaws. He then recalled what Jenny had mentioned previously, that the leader of the gang was a mixed blood, and although he himself could feel the overwhelming bloodthirst, he decided to begin his end of the attacks, calling out to the mudblood before him, then called him a piece of shikmat. When Guile demanded of him to repeat his words, he further exclaimed that the stink emanating from his fur, and cunningly questioned if he had taken a shower. Guile did not respond to the statements initially, and then started laughing frantically while swearing before him to rip his mouth into shreds. What will happen next? Find out next time by staying tuned for our future recaps. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more great recaps.